Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time.
So today we're going to break down Noam Chomsky's landmark book, Deterring Democracy. And our goal here isn't just to look at a bunch of different events one by one. No, we're trying to map out the underlying machine of U.S. foreign policy that Chomsky argues is at play.
You see, Chomsky's whole argument is that if you look past the day-to-day headlines, the constant stream of crises, there's actually a consistent, almost machine-like logic driving U.S. foreign policy. And here's the big idea, the main takeaway. What so often looks like a series of blunders or failures from our point of view is actually, according to this analysis, a perfectly rational system. It's not broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to, all to achieve a very, very specific goal. So that leads to a pretty obvious question, right? If it's a machine, what's its fuel? What's the main thing, the non-negotiable goal that drives its every single move? Well, according to Chomsky's analysis, the ultimate goal is incredibly consistent. It's all about one thing: protecting and promoting U.S. investment and trade. That means getting access to global markets, locking down key resources, and ensuring a supply of cheap labor. Everything else, things like human rights, democracy, those are secondary. They're nice to have, but they come second to that core incentive.
Chomsky highlights this quote from Churchill that just perfectly captures this whole worldview. It basically frames the global order as, a hierarchy. You've got the satisfied nations, the rich ones, who get to manage the world to protect their own peace and their own property. So naturally, any challenge to that setup is, by definition, a threat.
Okay, so if the whole point of the system is to protect this established order, what does it consider the biggest threat? I'll give you a hint. It's probably not what you're thinking.
All right, this is where the definition of a threat gets really interesting. In this framework, the biggest danger isn't some huge military rival. Nope, it's what Chomsky calls the threat of a good example. Imagine a small country starts using its own resources for its own people, and it actually works. Suddenly, that success story becomes a kind of virus. It shows everyone else that another way is possible, and that idea could spread, threatening the whole system. That's why the virus has to be stamped out, not because it's a military threat, but because it's a powerful, ideological one. So, to justify all these actions, both to the world and to its own citizens, the system has to do something really clever. It has to completely redefine the very words we use to talk about all this stuff.
Yeah, to make a system like this work, language gets turned on its head. So a word like democracy stops meaning rule by the people. Instead, it means rule by elites who are friendly to U.S. business interests. Stability doesn't mean peace for the people living there, it means security for foreign investments. This redefinition is absolutely critical because it's how you sell policies to the public that they'd never accept otherwise.
Which brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. How does a system like this keep going inside a society that is, for the most part, free and open? How do you get the public on board?
Well, one key mechanism is what Chomsky calls the Pentagon system. It's pretty straightforward, really. Taxpayer money gets funneled into the military for defense. But what it really does is act as a giant subsidy for private high-tech companies, paying for all their research and development. The profits? They go private. The risk? That's on the public. It's basically a kind of corporate welfare program, just dressed up as national security.
And the other side of that coin is what's called manufacturing consent. This is all about creating a sense of fear around some external enemy. That fear then justifies the huge military budget back home and the interventions overseas. The goal here is to keep the public on the sidelines, to turn them into what Walter Lippmann famously called bewildered spectators of action, instead of active participants. Democracy gets boiled down to just, choosing between a couple members of the same elite group every few years.
So when you put all of these pieces together, it leads us to the central idea of this whole analysis, what you could call a fundamental crisis in perception.
And this is the absolute core of that crisis. See, if we judge foreign policy by its stated goals, spreading democracy, protecting human rights, it often looks like a total failure, right? But if we judge it by its actual core incentive, protecting investments and stamping out those ideological viruses, then suddenly those same actions start to look like rational successes. A country left in ruins might be a failure at promoting democracy, but it's a huge success if the good example has been destroyed and the threat contained.
So the question this analysis really leaves us with is this: is it possible that what we see as a foreign policy failure is actually the system working perfectly, just for a purpose we're not supposed to see? That massive gap between what we perceive and what's really happening, that's the central crisis Chomsky's analysis points to. The system works. It just doesn't work for the reasons we're told it does.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis in perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.